First, the Denver Nuggets, after going down 0-2 at home, would strike back in Minnesota, getting a much-needed dominant win to keep the series alive. And then, the Indiana Pacers would get a narrow victory over New York in Game 3, just barely getting by them off of a wild shot from Andrew Nembhard. And then, the Mavericks get a huge win in Game 3, going up 2-1 on OKC after looking like they might just roll over and die after Game 1. Hello everybody, welcome to Awesome Rusty Bucket. Subscribe to the channel or follow us over on Spotify, depending on if you are on YouTube or taking this as an audio experience. If you do want to enjoy this as an audio experience, it is on Spotify currently. It will be on other platforms such as Apple Podcasts soon, but that will be the top link in the description and the pinned comment. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about these games. The Denver Nuggets needed to win Game 3 no matter what, because no team in NBA history has ever mounted an 0-3 comeback in the playoffs. The first quarter was mostly the Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray show as they combined for 16 points, with each of them having 8. Jamal was getting booed by the crowd, and I don't think it had the effect the crowd wanted because he would hit some tough pull-up middies. He drove really hard to the rim full court, getting bumped the whole way down, very, very physical. He also had a sick misdirection jump pass for Michael Porter Jr. to get an open 3. As for Minnesota's offense, they were kind of struggling. Cat started off with a pair of threes, but he wasn't really a big threat for the rest of the game, and for Minnesota, they would go 1 for 9 on the rest of their threes this quarter. There was this really sick play where Rudy set a pin down for Ant that turned into a slip to the basket for an easy dunk off of the Edwards pass. But otherwise, the offense was a struggle for Minnesota across the board. They would be going into the second quarter down 8 points, but unfortunately that deficit would be made even wider by Denver, as they would continue to rein in three-pointers, in spite of the fact that Nikola Jokic was not on the floor at the very start of this quarter. Now, normally, just not being a negative would be huge for this team when they don't have Jokic on the floor, but they were actually a positive this time. This happened because Jamal continued his impressive shot making. He had a pull-up 3 that ripped the net, a very impressive reverse layup through traffic, and later in the quarter he would hit a tough fader on the baseline on the right. Just a gorgeous shot. After a swing pass to Christian Braun for a left wing 3, Denver was up 45-25. Minnesota quickly started to go on a little run of their own as they made a couple of shots consecutively and went on an 8-0 run. However, Denver was no longer fazed by things like this. They just kept a level head and continued to execute their offensive sets. One of those sets in particular really stood out to me. It looked like Denver was bringing 2 screeners up top, MPJ and Jokic, so that Reggie Jackson could use them to get space, but Reggie would instead pass to Jokic at the top of the key, and he would immediately get a screen from Michael Porter Jr. In the confusion, Michael's defender would end up behind him, so he would slip to the rim. Jokic puts the pass exactly where it needs to be, and Michael would finish the layup. There were some defensive slip-ups for Denver in this one, particularly as it relates to Nikola Jokic, because anytime Anthony Edwards was basically an open floor and the only thing between him and the basket was Jokic, he treated that like food, like he wasn't intimidated by him in the slightest. Defense like that will allow you to blow the 15-point lead that you're heading into the second half with. Naz Reid had a perfect drive and kick to get Cat an open 3, but with that make, it was still a 15-point deficit, being 56-41 in favor of Denver. In the third quarter of all things, what really buried the Wolves was Aaron Gordon three-pointers, the first 2 coming from the right elbow instead of in the corner. Perhaps he's actually just more confident from that spot than he is the corner, which, if that's the case, same bestie. That's my hot spot too, Aaron. Cool. Denver in general was much smarter with how they utilized Aaron Gordon. They didn't just allow them to do exactly what they wanted as it related to defending Aaron. He had some better timed cuts, and again, he was hitting these jump shots, which is massive. Overall, he was huge in the second half, scoring 11 points on 4 for 4 shooting, including going 3 for 3 from outside. Jokic's defense also improved dramatically in the second half, as he did a great job as a disruptor, continually breaking up Minnesota's actions. He knocked it away from Ant as he was preparing to go into a fadeaway, I believe. He broke up a pick and roll pass. He broke up an interior pass from Cat to Kyle Anderson. He even got 2 blocks in the second half and 3 for the game in total. 3 is a lot for Jokic, and in total he would have 6 stocks with 3 steals as well. A surprisingly high counting stat defensive game for Nikola Jokic. He also had a much improved offensive second half, as he would score 17 of his 24 in this half. He was back to being dominant from floater range. The touch shots, Rudy's rotations were bothering him in game 1. And somehow, Cat and Kyle Anderson was bothering that shot in game 2, but that was out of the equation in this one, hitting a really tough hook shot, especially over Naz Reid and Rudy Gobert. This would be a good Ant quarter offensively. He hit a step-back corner 3 over Aaron Gordon, as well as some signature tough mid-range shots, but that's really the only positive Minnesota had going for them at this point. Kyle Anderson, of all people, hit a buzzer beater at the end of quarter 3. I just praised your defense, Jokic. How are you going to jump that hard at a Kyle Anderson pump fake? You'd be back on the ground before he even finished shooting it to begin with. You know how long it takes that dude to wind up the shot? Crazy. In the fourth quarter, Denver did not stop throwing haymakers. It was abundantly clear that they were not feeling Minnesota's defense in the same way that they were in games 1 and 2. The scrubs would be in by the 5-minute mark. It was that out of reach. This makes game 4 extremely interesting because Denver could tie this one up, winning both away games. Teams trading their home games has happened before, but it's been quite a while. Both teams have a lot riding on this game 4. It might be the game that decides the series. All right, so my key notes for the Denver Nuggets. Something big that I did not realize when talking about how they defended the pick and roll in game 2, they being the Timberwolves, between Jokic and Jamal Murray, was that they were not doing it in the empty side of the floor. They would have someone else standing in the corner, which unfortunately means that you are giving a help defender the ability to dig, which is like reach over and impact the play defensively, even without actually leaving the shooter all that open. So instead they were going empty corner pick and rolls, so that there was not an extra defender potentially getting involved. Other 3 players on the other side of the court on the weak side. And that gave more room for Jamal Murray to get open jump shots, pull up mid-range shots, a couple of pull-up threes. It also allowed Nikola Jokic, I think, to get in better post position on his initial attacks, which led to closer shots to the basket. It was just definitely a much better approach offensively. Another thing that they did that was great is they used Aaron Gordon a little bit differently. They had him shooting from the elbows, of course, so that's different inherently, but he also was just attacking from that part of the court more rather than running from an open corner where like the defense is not even thinking about you. If you're like more towards the elbow, the defense does feel more of a need to put a body between you and the rim because, you know, you can kind of hide behind the other action, whereas the corner was so fucking wide open that you could see anything Aaron was doing because there was not another body anywhere near him. But he can afford an escape a little bit more, slipping to the basket. He still got a couple, I think both of his cuts were straight out of the corner, but at the very least, it gave Minnesota more reason to defend him. It made it less of an easy task to leave him wide open. There was more of a punishment for that. I don't know that he can maintain the shooting aspect of it. Maybe he's just better from those elbows than he is from the corner, but he's never been a good three-point shooter really from any area of the floor as far as I'm aware. Maybe they like went and looked at the past stats from him and like what his hot spots were, and that was just the best spot for him to be on the floor. But it's definitely not something that I would be too concerned about if I was Minnesota, like the three-pointers being conceded, but I would be concerned about the empty side stuff and the fact that you're just having to worry about Aaron Gordon just a little bit. Just a little bit. That's all it really needs to be in order for it to be a problem. But of course, Jamal and Jokic having good scoring games is the primary factor at play here. If they were not hitting their shots, as they had not in the first 2 games of the series, then they very well could have lost. But at the end of the day, the team that made the shots won the game. It's not bold of a take. It's not really an outlier thing to say. That's just the way that basketball fucking works. In particular, I was looking at Jamal Murray kind of sideways after the game 2 that he had, and really he's just been bad the entire playoffs. I was like, okay, is playoff Jamal just not a thing this year? Are we not going to see it? I think we saw it in this game. It wasn't anything extraordinary. It wasn't like a 50-piece, like some shit that he's done in the past, especially in the bubble. He's not going to average 27 for the rest of the series, I don't think. But he was hitting his shots when he needed to, and it was enough. It was enough offensive creation that wasn't up to Jokic. And then, of course, Jokic also had a pretty good game, and I think it was just because he had better touch than he did previously. Obviously, the defensive scheme from the Minnesota Timberwolves was really strong, and they don't need to go away from it. There's nothing to change here. If he's just going to make these shots, he's going to make these shots. You have to live with that result. But truthfully, it did feel like he missed a lot of shots, especially in game one, that he could have made. So stood to reason that there would be a game here where those shots just start going in, and here it finally does. The fact that they did well in the non-Jokic minutes, as I mentioned earlier, is massive. It's not common that this team is a positive without Jokic on the floor, let alone not being one of the biggest negatives, because they're usually that too. Justin Holiday went 2 for 3 from outside. Seems like he's just been in a vendetta to prove that he's actually good ever since I said he was a terrible playoff rotation player, but he is really the only guy who resembles a shooter off of the bench for Denver, and he's clearly shown a lot of value there, especially given Aaron Gordon's issues. There were lineups where it was him and Christian Braun. And Christian Braun, I think the defense is relatively okay leaving wide open, but him, Justin Holiday, they were in the game and there was no Aaron Gordon, so every player on the floor at least seemed more confident and better at threes than Aaron Gordon was. Things were just spaced out better. I do wonder if there will be possessions we see late where Justin Holiday gets in the game for Aaron Gordon. He was playing power forward in the small ball lineup, or he might have been small forward because Michael Porter Jr. was also on the floor, but either way, he plays a little bit bigger than he is, especially given that he looks like a freaking twig, and he hits his threes. So I could see possessions late where they're like, we don't want them to just be able to abuse the Aaron Gordon corner 3 fiasco, so let's just put Justin Holiday out there. They'll have to either respect it, or if it does end up in Holiday's hands, we trust him to hit that shot more than we do Aaron. You'd have to be careful with that, because I do think you ultimately want Aaron in the game late for defense, regardless of what offensive sacrifices you have. So it could just be like a possession to possession thing if they're like managing it with timeouts and such. But yeah, that's something to watch out for. He was very big in this one. They came out of the gate determined, and they kept their foot on the gas. They were not playing behind like they had initially in pretty much every other game in this postseason thus far. They are averaging 10 less points per game in the first half than they are in the second half, which is very clearly an indicator of them being like, oh shit, we actually have to win this game. Let's go hard. Let's put our foot on the gas in the second half. But if you do that from the start, you don't have to worry about executing in crunch time later, and you can just be more comfortable. It doesn't have to be as sketch as it is otherwise. In general, this team did a lot better at generating space on the offensive end of the floor, which is exactly what they needed to do to even survive going forward, because this is a team, Minnesota, that just sucks up all the space out of where you think to operate. It's just so hard to deal with a team that can both W and rotate on whatever opportunity you create out of that double as well as they do. It's one of the most impressive defensive teams I've ever seen, but Denver is still ridiculous offensively, and they managed to find their stride in this one. They managed to approach the game in a way that would give them more space. I wonder how Minnesota is going to adapt to that, so I guess we'll just transition to my key notes for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Ant and Karl Anthony Towns were both scoring poorly on low volume. That's just not great. Their efficiency was okay. But 19 points and 15 points for the both of them, it's just not enough. This team does not have enough scoring beyond those two players to just like fuck around and not shoot the ball a lot. Like 15 shots in 37 minutes, it's just not enough, Anthony. He needs to shoot the ball more than that. Probably the first time the overall factor to their offense that we saw in the regular season, where I believe they finished ranked 16th in offensive rating. They were clearly a better offensive team than that in my head, so I'm not surprised that they have looked better in the postseason than you probably would have expected just looking at their offensive rating, and also considering that they played the frickin' Phoenix Suns in round one, who are a terrible defensive team. But this was the first time where the concerns I had about their offense actually showed through, and I got a little bit of pushback. Not to do the victory lap thing here, but I said that I still had some concerns about their offense, and here we are, and they didn't execute enough on offense. Now, obviously, giving up 117 points, the odds that they're going to match that are pretty low. You need to hold Denver to less than that, and they've had no problem doing that in the first 2 games. They didn't do that here. Because you lower the bar of points that you need on offense, because you're holding your opponent to such a low amount on defense, it gives you more room to have a meh offense. When Jokic and Murray are getting to their spots without much trouble, and overall the defense is just not that impressive as it was in the first 2 games, if you have that and your star players are not getting their shots off, then there's just no fucking way you're going to win. Then you're going to be playing scrubs at the halfway point of the 4th quarter because it's just going to be that out of reach. I feel like they lost their intensity as they grew further and further into the deficit. After it was a 20-point game, they kind of fought to get it down to 12 at one point in the 2nd quarter, but I don't think it got any closer than that for the rest of the game, and it felt like their intensity on the defensive end was just dialed back. They tuned it down, and I just don't know if that was the right move. I think they were called for a few more fouls than they were in game 2, which is a thing a lot of people were discussing, but I don't know that they really should have dialed back the aggressiveness, because the aggressiveness, sure, like if you're down, that kind of sucks and it gets you dejected, but that physicality and such that they were dominating with, you can get a deficit to stay small while your offense slowly builds it up, even if you're having a rough offensive game. You can probably live with the open Aaron Gordon threes. That's just how it goes sometimes when you use that strategy. You're like, hey, I'm going to force this guy to hit threes. Sometimes they actually will. They also did not get Gobert rolling to the rim in any impressive capacity whatsoever, whether it was him attacking off of the short roll or otherwise. So, yeah, just not a lot of good stuff going for them offensively. If those guys are not going to score, and you're also not going to get Gobert rolling to the rim hard, Mike Conley didn't really shoot the ball all that well, and Gilgeous-Alexander Walker was like fine, but not creating a ton of offense. He did hit a pull-up 3 for what that's worth. But other than that, yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there's much to suggest for this team. They have a good game plan. They just need to actually execute it, and they need to maintain their energy throughout the game. They can't just lose it the moment that there is a deficit. You can't go down 15 and give up, because Minnesota knows how to lay on the point, or because Denver knows how to lay on the points. Moving on to Pacers-Knicks Game 3, Round 2. The Indiana Pacers decided to switch the Jalen Brunson matchup from Andrew Nembhard to Aaron Nesmith, and man, did it make a difference. Especially at the start where Jalen especially struggled. He would go 0 for 5 in the first quarter, all while Tyrese Haliburton followed his much improved Game 2 performance with an even better one. He would score 10 in this quarter. Luckily for New York, the discrepancy in their point guard play only resulted in a 9-point deficit going into the second quarter. What's crazy about Indiana's performance in this one, and really in the series at large, is how much they've been able to keep the Knicks off of the offensive glass. As a whole, they're now averaging 10 offensive boards a game in this series after averaging 14.5 versus Philly. Indiana ended up getting 9 more shots than New York in this one, shots which would essentially decide this game. In the second quarter, due to yet another injury affecting the Knicks' rotation, Alec Burks ended up getting some run, and I think it's fair to say he was nothing short of amazing. He would go 4 for 4 from the field, including 2 3-pointers, getting him 13 points in the quarter in general, also getting an and 1. Jalen would also come alive in this quarter, scoring 11 points, shooting efficiently, primarily because he did not have the Aaron Nesmith matchup for much of this quarter. As a whole, in the first half, Brunson would shoot 2 for 9 and get 2 turnovers while guarded by Aaron. On the Pacers' end of things, while the defense did not resemble what it did in the first quarter, at the very least their offense was more familiar and was able to match it enough that they still went into the half with a 5-point lead. Haliburton continued hitting nasty 3 after nasty 3. This quarter essentially just turned into trading buckets. With 40 seconds to go, Brunson hit a tough fadeaway, Alec Burks would get open for a pick and pop 3, and Pascal Siakam would pull off a gorgeous behind the back move to get space for a midi, just barely keeping his balance enough to ensure that the shot would go in. The third quarter of this game belonged to one Dante DiVincenzo. He was going off from outside, with each three getting progressively more difficult. It just did not matter what the defense did. He also got a great backdoor pass from Hartenstein, and he got an and one on the fast break. There was much more of the smothering Knicks defense that we have come to know from them so far in this postseason in this quarter, as Indiana was really struggling offensively. There was a poster dunk on Hartenstein from Miles Turner, as well as an insane finish from Tyrese Halliburton adjusting in air to avoid the contest, but otherwise, that's all the space that they could find. Very rough offensive quarter. This meant that Indiana would be trailing by 5 points going into the fourth quarter. DiVincenzo started the fourth immediately with another three, which would have you believe he might be going on yet another heater. But no, he didn't score again for the rest of the game. Halliburton started attacking again in this quarter, like just relentlessly, which is exactly what we were all asking of him after taking 6 shots in game 1, which was just practically giving that game to New York. He scored a ridiculous and one in extreme traffic, and he would intercept a Brunson pass to Dante, getting a layup on the other end as a result. Siakam hit a difficult and one himself on a post move on Josh Hart, falling down in the process. With 2 minutes and some change to go, Miles Turner would block Josh Hart's layup on the fast break, which resulted in Nembhard driving and finishing off of the catch on the other end. Here's where New York would make a game-deciding mistake. Pascal Siakam goes for a layup. This layup is not going in, but Dante DiVincenzo decides to touch it too early and goaltends it. Luckily, this didn't take the Knicks out of it. Brunson hit a gutsy three to tie the game at 106 apiece. Then New York would proceed to lock down for most of Indiana's possession, but Andrew Nembhard would hit a ridiculous, miraculous step-back three to beat the shot clock. The furthest shot he has hit in his entire NBA career. New York did not get a clean look off of the inbounds, and Indiana takes game 3. What a brutal way to lose. Indiana ends up keeping their season alive in a pivotal game 3, similar to what Denver did, and I just gotta say I'm very happy for that, because I was thinking maybe these series might end up being sweeps, and that would be pretty freaking lame. Alright, my key notes for the Indiana Pacers. Aaron Nesmith is a way better matchup against Jalen Brunson than Andrew Nembhard. No offense to Nembhard, because he's actually pretty damn good defensively, especially for not being that big of a defender, but I think if you can afford to put the size on Brunson, which you definitely can here, then you should do that. I'm really not too worried about like a Josh Hart matchup, for example. I think that you can handle a guard being on him. You do worry about the rebounding there, and he did have 18 rebounds in this game, 4 of which were offensive. For the most part, you know, they have been surviving the rebounding battle and winning the rebounding battle, if anything, especially considering how much New York was known for that aspect of the game. So yeah, I think that matchup change is a huge thing to have going forward. It definitely clearly bothered Brunson. He got better as the game went along. He definitely was not as inconsistent the whole way through. He started off bad, kind of figured it out, especially when he got minutes without Nesmith actually guarding him. Definitely something that could turn the tides of this series if it maintains itself to any degree. An aggressive Tyrese Halliburton equals a good Indiana offense. We saw them very narrowly losing game 2, and a lot of that was because they actually had a very good performance from Tyrese Halliburton. And in this one, yet again, he was awesome. He was launching shots. He put up 16 freaking three-pointers in this one. He only hit 6 of them, but that's still 37%, so we take it. Just an absolutely aggressive version of him. He only got 7 assists, but frankly, I think those assists are higher quality than the stuff he was getting in game 1, because he's actually getting downhill. He's actually getting the defense to collapse and creating new opportunities rather than just reading the, just making the right read. It's not the same as actually creating the play, and Halliburton was doing a whole lot to create plays in this one, just nonstop, and it was pretty much every quarter, which is great. He just kept applying pressure the whole way through. Their 3 best players combined for 80 points, which is great. Those 3 being Miles, Pascal, and Tyrese. Miles had 21, Pascal had 24, and Tyrese had 35. I think TJ McConnell's still doing a little bit too much. I feel like he should not be as prevalent of a shot creator on this team as he is. He had his moments, I think, especially, it was either game 2 or game 1 where he had like a really good game. But otherwise, like, he went 3 for 10 in this one. I just just don't want him shooting as much as he is. He can still play plenty. He's a good NBA player, but I feel like they're leaning into the idea that he's just this major playoff riser for some reason, and I just don't know if that's the move. I don't know if the TJ minutes have been as great as they would like to think that they have been. The most impressive thing to me, though, about Indiana's performance here is the offensive glass thing. Like, the fact that you are winning the offensive rebounding battle against a team that looked like it was the best at it in the league. That is very good. They had more offensive rebounds than New York in this one. 10 a game is still not a bad number. It's a little bit better than average, but it's not quite 14.5 like they averaged versus Philly. Now, is them winning the rebounding battle and having a better matchup for Jalen Brunson going to swing the series in the opposite direction? I don't know. I wouldn't say yes, but I also wouldn't necessarily say no. It also can be dependent on the timeline of OG Anunoby. Like, is he going to be back and good, or is if he going to be back, is he actually going to be good, or is he just going to be, a guy who's playing injured very clearly? His presence was definitely missed in this one on both ends of the floor. Indiana probably does not have as good of an offensive game as they did if they have OG available. But yeah, unfortunately they didn't, so they lose. My key takeaways for the New York Knicks. I honestly think this game went about as well as you could considering the circumstances. Like, if Jalen Brunson's going to have a bad game and you're going to lose the offensive rebounding battle, to lose this game narrowly, to have gotten 9 less shots than the other team did, and the shot that it came down to was a shot that probably misses 9 times out of 10, that deep step back Andrew Nembhard 3 is the one I'm talking about. You probably win this game more often than you don't, even with those circumstances at hand, because Brunson got better late. That's actually happened with Brunson's struggles. I felt like, especially those first 2 games versus Philly, where we were like, oh, what's up with Jalen? He kind of sucks right now. He would at least turn it up at the fourth quarter. That's what you would hope for him, and that's exactly what happened in this game. You got a good Jalen when you needed a good Jalen the most. A bad Jalen put you in a deficit early, but he eventually drug you out of it, along with Donte DiVincenzo, who also, if Jalen Brunson's having a bad game, you want to get a good Donte DiVincenzo game to make up for that lost offense. They got exactly that, even if he wasn't really carrying it over into the fourth quarter much. 35 points is 35 points. I feel like this is a game the Knicks more or less have to live with. Like, ridiculous shots. They lost the offensive glass battle. Jalen was not that efficient. It was still barely a loss under those circumstances. That tells me you did all the things from a game plan perspective and mostly from a defensive perspective that you really could do. Just sometimes things don't go your way, and that was probably the case in this one. I'm curious how much of a threat Indiana actually poses from here. Game 4 is going to be big because, I don't think Indiana's making a 3-1 comeback, but, obviously New York really wants that to happen. I do think, and I thought this might happen in this specific matchup, that Indiana's propensity to go for fast breaks would actually rattle the New York Knicks strategy here a little bit. Like, they would be scared to fuck up and give up easy fast break opportunities because their guards are staying back for offensive rebounds. I've talked about before how a lot of their rebounds aren't even necessarily like a straight up just grabbing the board near the basket, but often, whether it's Hartenstein or Josh Hart or whoever, it's often someone just volleyballing it out of the 3-point line, and then one of the guards actually corrals the rebound. That hasn't happened much here because I think they're trying to get back on defense a little bit more because Indiana is still being a very high-paced team. I felt like in the first one, Indiana was playing towards New York's pace, and as the series has gone along, they have gotten more and more comfortable actually being themselves. Tyrese Halliburton, again, that's been a big part of it. Speaking of Tyrese, they actually hunted Tyrese a lot on the switch. Didn't really get a lot of great results out of that, but I also definitely think Hallie on Brunson is better than Nesmith on Brunson, so you probably keep trying to do that. In fact, I think you should probably try to do it a little bit earlier in the game than they did, because you really didn't see that until around the fourth quarter. I think you should really try to punish Halliburton on defense the entire game. Make him play defense. He did a decent enough job. He did actually get a block. He got a chase down block on I think it was Donte DiVincenzo for a layup, and I didn't know he could do that. But yeah, very good game from the Indiana Pacers, and I think, all things considered, not a bad performance from the Knicks. Not much adjustments to make. You kind of just go into game 4 with the same game plan and hope the ball bounces your way a little bit more. Let's get into OKC versus Dallas game 3. All right, so to start off the first quarter, wait, is that Josh Giddey? Are we fucking for real, Mark Daignault? Is it not obvious at this point to you that Giddey has no place in this rotation? Because it's pretty obvious to most of us. Like, I obviously don't know more than an NBA head coach, but I feel like I would at least know not to do this. But anyways, PJ Washington managed to carry over his scoring from Game 2 into this game as well, albeit not being as efficient. In this first quarter, he would score 11 points on 5 for 7 shooting, getting a near poster out of the gate, abusing Giddey on a mismatch in the post, and hitting a three-pointer, also setting up Gafford for a layup with a great pass. This offense from PJ was extremely necessary as Luka and Kyrie combined for just 10 points in the first quarter. As for OKC, they shot pretty horribly from outside for most of this quarter, starting 1 for 8. SGA was cooking fairly early, however most of this was coming specifically from mid-range. For pretty much this entire game, he was not able to get to the rim all that much at all, which meant taking lower efficiency shots that Dallas was content with. OKC did finally take the lid off of the basket at the end of the quarter as SGA would hit a step-back 3 over Luka and Isaiah Joe would hit one on the left wing in the final 10 seconds of the quarter. Isaiah Joe continued to cook going into the second quarter, starting off 3 for 3. On Dallas's end of things, PJ Washington would continue to score the ball, hitting a pair of threes in the quarter, overall scoring 19 points in the first half. Once again, this quarter ended with both teams trading a pair of three-pointers, with Luka hitting a step back and then Joe hitting his three out of the corner, his second three-pointer in the final 10 seconds of a quarter. OKC was up by 1 going into the half, and they would start the third quarter with an 11-0 run. Begrudgingly, I must admit that Giddey, who I've been shitting on for this entire playoff, indeed did actually score and assist on 7 of those 11 points, but he would proceed to give them up on the other end as Dallas would go on an 11-0 run of their own, with PJ Washington hitting 2 corner threes, as did Josh Green. Dallas also got 6 offensive rebounds in this quarter, with all 6 of them coming from different players. They actually got 3 straight on one possession. One of them resulted in a Kyrie Irving catch-and-shoot 3, and because all of these quarters need to end with a three-pointer, Tim Hardaway Jr., who was huge in Game 2, easily loses Gordon Hayward off ball on the Gafford handoff, and he would swish the 3. Kyrie would get it going early in the fourth quarter, hitting a post fade in semi-transition, which is a wild shot to attempt, but hey, it's Kyrie Irving. He'd also hit a gorgeous spin jumper over J-Dub. After a lob from Tim Hardaway Jr. to Derek Lively, Dallas had a 9-point lead with 8 minutes to go. Mark Daigneault didn't exactly know very clearly who he wanted to close this game with the other 4 starters, because clearly Giddey wasn't going to be in this late. He originally went with Jalen Williams, who has been pretty damn great in these playoffs. He's shooting very well from outside, and he is of course a big body, and given that Dallas was dominating on the offensive glass in the third quarter, it did make sense to get a little bit more size out there, but he eventually opted to end the game with Isaiah Joe, who immediately off of a pin-down screen from Chet would hit a huge 3 at the top of the key to make it a one-possession game. He would unfortunately then proceed to turn the ball over to Luka, who would take it inside to make it a 5-point game. OKC got it back down to 3 points though, and Dallas, in need of a clutch bucket to put this team away, went to Kyrie Irving, and if you didn't know, that usually works out pretty well. He hit J-Dub with a crossover, got to the basket, and floated it in with his left hand. SGA would get an offensive foul on a drive, which essentially ended the game. Dallas would win 105-101. OKC now had a ton of pressure on them going into Game 4 in Dallas. Alright, so my key notes for the Dallas Mavericks. Goddamn, PJ Washington has been freaking massive for this team in the last 2 games, who has desperately needed this scoring punch given that Kyrie Irving has not been all that great in the first halves of these games, and that Luka Doncic has only been good, really, for his standard in 1 out of these 3 games, primarily because he was suffering from an injury, although I will say in this Game 3 and in Game 2, he moved a lot better than he did in the original game. In the case of this third one, he kind of just had a bad game because he had a bad shooting game, not so much because he just physically didn't look capable of getting to his spots, because he got to his spots a lot more often than he had again in that Game 1. But PJ Washington hitting a ton of corner threes, hitting his threes in general. He has 12 makes over the last 2 games. It's just a massive difference maker. I was a little concerned about the Dallas Mavericks and kind of both ends of the floor in terms of Maxi Kleber being out, because that would then mean that, you got to do Derrick Jones and PJ Washington. Maxi was shooting 60% from 3 in the playoffs before he got hurt. So, is PJ actually going to maintain that efficiency? I've been a big PJ believer for a very long time, but his 3-ball has been very inconsistent. There's been times where I thought it was pretty evident that he would be a very strong stretch forward. Other times where he just is like around the 34% mark, which is not terrible, but it's definitely not great. But he's been lights out in this series thus far, specifically in the last 2 games. And if he continues to be a knockdown 3-point shooter, that makes it a lot harder for teams to bring help on Luka and Kyrie, which primarily in this series has been OKC's strategy to just let these guys shoot their jumpers if they're not Kyrie and Luka, and just hope for the best. Unfortunately for them, the math really has not worked out in their favor in that one, as PJ was just lights out from outside these last 2 games, and that could end up swinging this series entirely. You don't generally get excellent role player performances back-to-back in a playoff series. Usually a role player will swing a game or 2 here or there, but this level of impact is actually extremely impressive from PJ. I remember back like a couple of years ago, B-Souls made this post on Twitter about like, what's a player that you think like could prove to be a valuable role player on a contender, and it was a photo of Terry Rozier. And I was like, of all the players on the Hornets, you pick Terry Rozier over PJ. Like, PJ is built to be this perfect role player on a championship team, and he's proving exactly that, especially if the 3-ball continues to drop, which we hope it does. As I mentioned, the Dallas Mavericks absolutely dominated on the offensive glass. OKC would get 6 offensive rebounds to Dallas's 15, and the fun part about how Dallas did this is all but one of the 8 players who were in the rotation, all of them got an offensive rebound. It was just kind of universal that if you played in this game, you were playing the offensive glass for Dallas. There was just multiple instances in this game where they ended up getting more shots and more opportunities than OKC, and that's going to win you the game. Kyrie's shot making late was absolutely unbelievable. Not that this is something that we haven't known Kyrie to be capable of doing, but it's kind of been a while since we've actually seen him do this in the postseason. He was not very good in the postseason against the Boston Celtics when he was on the Brooklyn Nets most recently. They didn't make the playoffs last year, so you couldn't have gotten him there. And then in the series before that, I think in 2021, he got hurt versus the Milwaukee Bucks, so he couldn't even play. Realistically, we haven't really seen Kyrie good in a postseason setting in quite a while. Even if I'm remembering correctly, the last series he played on the Celtics, he wasn't very good. So for that reason, it's nice to see him back doing what he does best, and he was hitting a bunch of difficult shots in this one, which were very necessary for Dallas with Luka Doncic struggling. They needed to have someone like Kyrie to hit those shots, and that's an element of this offense that the team just has not had before. Luka having as bad of a game as he did, and I'll say every time I say this with Luka, that is relative to the scale of what he's capable of. He still had like 24, 15, and 7. Those are good numbers, but Luka Doncic, we know, is capable of putting up 33, 12, and 12. So, not a great game from him, but you're getting the contributions from Kyrie late. You're getting the contributions offensively from PJ Washington throughout the first 3 quarters of this game. That's just awesome. The fact that you can survive a playoff game against this good OKC team with a bad Luka performance, that's something we cannot say for any other iteration of the Dallas Mavericks before this year. If Luka has a bad game, the Mavericks lose. That's just the reality of the situation. If not 10 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10. Derek Lively had a really weird game in this one. It's kind of hard to evaluate. He shot 2 for 7 from the field, which is obviously not very strong for a, interior finishing big man. Missed a really point-blank hook shot that I remember, but he also got blocked or stripped on multiple shots. One of them I remember being specifically a Lou Dort chase down block that was just ridiculous. And most of these were not he went up for a shot that obviously was going to get blocked. he just kind of got screwed late not seeing this coming. But he did end up going to the free throw line a lot, somewhat intentionally on OKC's part, sending him to the line. However, while he only went, I think, 8 for 12 in the game in general, which is, so-so. What was it? Yeah, he went 8 for 12. He hit all of the ones late. I think he went 4 for 4 in the fourth quarter on free throws when they were trying to make him prove that he could make those shots, and he did. I also just straight up have come to the conclusion that Derek Lively is a little bit better than Daniel Gafford. I know Daniel has the seniority there, but frankly, Lively just makes way better decisions with the ball. Whether that be because he's just gotten an offensive rebound and he needs to kick it out to the open shooter, or if he's on the short roll and like PJ Washington's cutting, or you're trying to make the right read to the shooter. I feel like Daniel Gafford, anytime he needs to make a quick decision, he just hesitates long enough that decision's not available, where Lively trusts his instincts and just makes the right play more often than he doesn't. I also feel like he's a little bit stronger of a defender, not by a wide margin by any means. I think Gafford's probably a little bit better of a rebounder, probably a little bit better of a lob target, but personally, I think Lively's defense and decision-making makes him the better player. He ended up playing more in this game despite the fact that he was struggling from the field, while Gafford actually went 4 for 5, but the little things that actually matter and impact the game, I think Lively just does those things better. Derrick Jones Jr. had a bad game, shot 1 for 10. Obviously, he still played some good defense, especially on SGA, but ideally, he would shoot better than that. He had a pretty terrible plus-minus as a result. I don't know if Tim Hardaway Jr. continuing to play is the move. That three-pointer that he really only got because Gordon Hayward, of all people, was guarding him and did a terrible job. That's really the only play from this game that I remember from him. Otherwise, not much positive there. Going 3 for 9 from the field. Not a strong defender. He had a very big game, too, that actually was probably the main reason they won that game, on top of PJ Washington being awesome in that one. But that's just not really replicable here. I don't really think that he's going to keep doing that. So that's not great. But yeah, other than that, there's really not much to be critical of Dallas here, obviously. They just won the game. They have a very real shot of going up 3-1 going into Game 4, and I do think as long as Luka Doncic looks, a little bit better than he was in this one, it's really achievable, especially if PJ Washington can continue to be as impactful as he has been. OKC, not out of this yet, though, so let's go ahead and get over to the key notes for them. All right, seriously, please cut Josh Giddey out of this rotation. There are so many better options available to you. Literally, they tried them all out in this game. Aaron Wiggins, Jalen Williams, the center, not J-Dub, Isaiah Joe, Cason Wallace. All of these guys got different opportunities at different stages of this game, and I feel like you would probably just be better off cutting Giddey out entirely and giving all of those guys just a little bit more minutes and having it just be a little bit more consistent. Those guys knowing when and where they're getting in the game, what role they're having specifically, rather than on a night-by-night basis. It's like, is Isaiah Joe going to play in the fourth quarter? Is he going to close? Jalen Williams got super late run in this one. Is that necessarily a good idea? He's kind of experimenting on the fly when I feel like there should be a more definitive system in place here, a more definitive game plan. And I don't know if it's because they're like trying to save Josh Giddey's reputation as a playoff performer by having him actually play, but frankly, the fact that he starts but just plays like 10 minutes, not a good look. The fact that he's been terrible defensively, not a good look. The fact that offensively speaking, can't hit a 3, and Dallas is dominating defensively because of that, because they're putting the center on that matchup and just letting him take as many 3s as he wants, because who gives a shit? He's bad at them. And the playmaking thing, which was like the main selling point for Josh Giddey going into the NBA, he doesn't even really seem to do that anymore for real. Like, he had a really nice lob to Jalen Williams in this one, but other than that, I don't remember a single pass that he made that was really noteworthy. I talk about this every time I talk about playmaking, but whatever, I'll say it again. If you're not a scoring threat, your playmaking becomes significantly less valuable. And he's not a scoring threat. At best, he is okay at scoring inside the three-point line with like some short floaters and things like that. But even then, it's not really an ideal shot. And as a defense, you are much happier with Josh Giddey taking a floater than SGA or J-Dub or Chet doing anything that's not that. I think Isaiah Joe should really be the guy here. I don't understand why he isn't. I don't understand why he didn't play more in this game. good on Mark for actually playing him late in the fourth quarter. I think that was overall a positive, even though he did have a big turnover. But for the playoffs as a whole, he's shooting 46% from three in 15 minutes a game, taking over 3.5 a game in that stretch. There's been multiple different times in this game and in this series, and I guess in the playoffs for OKC in general, but especially in this series against the better competition, where the spacing was kind of rough, especially with Gideon, but also Aaron Wiggins went 0 for 3 in this one. Cason Wallace isn't really a strong shooter outside of the corner. He's like ridiculous in the corner, and that's the only 3 that he made in this game was a left wing corner catch and shoot. But other than that, not really contributing that much spacing either. Isaiah Joe's a great shooter, and it's not as though this is a defensive sacrifice, because Isaiah Joe's not a bad defender. He's not great. He's not great. I wouldn't say he's a great defender by any stretch, but he's not small, unlike Cason Wallace, and he is just a knockdown shooter, and I think that offensive trade-off, absolutely worth it. And, you know, they clearly felt that way going into the late in the fourth quarter of this one, and I would just hope that this means that he gets more and more opportunity as the playoffs go along. Realistically, I feel like he should be starting, because like Aaron Wiggins is probably the best defensive option you have as a big forward. He's also better at attacking off of the catch. Cason Wallace is probably your nice in between, because I feel like he's a better shooter than Aaron Wiggins. But one way or the other, I just think it can't be Josh Giddey. Like 6'8" Timothy Chalamet is not doing anything for you at this point, other than like, I don't know, his hair looks kind of cool as he's getting beat on defense. It's just not a good look, and I think they lost game 2 in those Giddey minutes because he was a negative 20 in like 10 minutes of action. In this one, his plus minus was fine just because he contributed to that run in the third quarter. But literally, other than like this 2-minute stretch where he hit a 3-pointer and he hit a floater and he threw a lob to J-Dub, that's literally the only positive basketball I have seen from him in this entire series. And I think he had one good game in the Pelican series and otherwise was dog shit there too against weaker competition. He just shouldn't be playing. Also, something that I skipped over for Isaiah Joe, he has the 3rd best plus minus on this team in the postseason thus far for any player in the rotation who's played 100 or more minutes. He is a net positive objectively. SGA and Chet are the only guys who are bigger positives than him thus far. Play him. Play Isaiah Joe. He's very, very good. He spaces the floor super well. Imagine like with Chet out there, who you have to respect from outside, Isaiah, who you have to respect from outside, J-Dub, who you have to respect from outside, SGA, who you have to respect in any capacity, and then whoever the other guy ends up being, maybe it's Lou Dort for his defense, and he's been a decent shooter, although I think he shot poorly in this game. That's so much better spacing. I don't think your defense gets worse, especially if the alternative is Josh Giddey. And then you're not having something like Daniel Gafford just roaming around the basket because there's a non-shooter on the floor. That's truly the biggest issue for this team, and I don't get it. Like, I knew that Josh Giddey was going to get some run in the postseason. Like, obviously, they're not just going to outright cut him from the rotation from the jump, but I figured over time it would become increasingly more obvious that he just shouldn't be playing. And I thought that game 2 was going to be the nail in the coffin, that it was going to be just too freaking obvious that the guy is a huge negative and you shouldn't play him. But lo and behold, they do the same exact thing in this game. And while I don't think that was necessarily the biggest reason why they lost, I do think the general confusion around the rotation, not really knowing what they're going with late, not really knowing how they're going to close, that really hurt them more than even just Josh Giddey being a problem. Jalen Williams has been great in the playoffs. He's shooting 47% from 3. He's a big body. You know, if you want to go with him so you have more size, I kind of understand that, especially if he's going to keep hitting the threes. But whatever option you go with, it can't be Josh Giddey. It just can't. SGA couldn't get to the rim in this game. And I remember very early in this one, there was a drive from SGA where he probably would have gotten a decent look at the rim. However, Josh Giddey was like cutting back door at the same time this was happening. Daniel Gafford looked at him as Giddey was running to the corner for a 3-pointer, and he was like, oh, he's going to shoot a 3? That's good with me. I'm going to go play help defense on SGA. SGA is forced to kick out of an awkward situation to Giddey, who of course breaks the shot. It's just making the defense way too easy. It's way too easy to defend this team when you have that bad of a shooter out there. Chet kind of forgettable offensively in this one. J-Dub did hit some impressive shots late, but also I do feel like his volume could be a little bit higher. And for a lot of people who were talking shit about how damn good J-Dub is, I do think there are some people who have jumped the gun just mildly on him, although there's equally as many people who don't actually realize how good he is, so I understand why there would be the counter to that. But both of them not really doing a ton offensively in this one. In general, Dallas shot 10% more of their shots in the paint. SGA was not really getting easy opportunities at the rim. Pretty much the only time he was getting to the basket, he was getting fouled, so he wasn't even like actually making the layups, which means he's just getting a bunch of jump shots, and they're going in, but a mid-range pull-up is preferable to getting to the rim, getting free throws, getting layups, etc. I do feel the need to mention SGA had 5 blocks. I feel like I remember one of them, which is crazy. Like, these were the most subtle blocks that they could have possibly been. Chet had 4. I think all 4 were in the first half. But what do they do to turn this around? Is there something that they can do to win game 4? I mean, obviously it's not over here. I don't know. I just think they got to have a more locked-in game plan, a more sure thing going into this one, because the inconsistency is just not worth it. I don't know what the sacrifice here is. Why does Josh Giddey have to play? Is like the front office telling Mark this? I keep coming back to it, but it's truly the most baffling thing about OKC this postseason. Again, I knew he would play, but there has been more than enough evidence that he shouldn't be anymore. So yeah, that would be why OKC lost this game, I'd say. Not good. Not good at all. And Dallas looks like they might be advancing to the Western Conference Finals, but I guess we will see 2 days from now. But that is it. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.